Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this, a Remington Model 1148 chambered in 16 gauge. Now when we're talking about this, we're going to talk about a little bit of history. Remington's first semi-automatic product offering, in a shotgun at least, was the Model 11, which has been previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. The Model 11 was a licensed copy of the Browning A5, which you would know that if you'd seen the video, linked in the description. Now, this shotgun would be a successful offering for Remington, and it would be in long-term production up until World War II, because during World War II, America switched over to a wartime economy, which pretty much meant that all industries were now producing weapons for were producing materiel for the United States military, and none were more so impacted by this than the firearms industry. Civilian firearms sales or consumer sales really went down during this time period because the United States government was buying up everything that met specific requirements for their uses. That was not just frontline uses in this case. So though shotguns did see some frontline use, most notably in the Pacific, shotguns were still needed by other personnel that were not fighting on the front, be this MPs, military prison guards, or security guards who were protecting the docks and industry and all that kind of stuff. So pretty much everything chambered in 12 gauge was getting bent towards the United States government, as long as it held more than like 2 rounds. In addition to that, a lot of these shotguns were also utilized for training for either bomber crews, like machine gunners on bombers, or anti-aircraft crews, so that they could get an understanding of how to lead a target and all that kind of stuff. Some of these guns would also be set up with the same sighting arrangements that they would find, that these crews would find on their weapon system, so in order for them to also get used to engaging targets with that sighting system, which allowed the United States government to save more money on the ammunition for the actual live fire portion with those designated weapon systems by pre-training with shotguns. It's something that's actually been used frequently throughout history. If you think about like cadet rifles being chambered in 22 LR, you're not necessarily wasting full power rifle ammunition trying to teach somebody just the fundamentals of how to shoot a rifle. You can go ahead and have something that has all the same pieces and parts as the full up rifle, but chambered in 22 long rifle to allow them to be able to build that skill. Now, also during the war, Remington would of course get tapped to produce weapons, specifically the Model 1903 Springfield. And in order to be able to meet demand for the rifle, they would wind up coming across quite a few manufacturing refining processes, which would ultimately culminate in that rifle in the rifle produced by Remington and the pattern that they came up with getting its own designation, the 1903A3, also previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. Post-war, Remington decided that they wanted to go ahead and take a look at these processes that they utilized during the war in order to refine their product catalog. Ultimately, applying these refining processes to their shotguns would come out with the 1148, seen here, in 1949. This shotgun would become very popular and actually would lay down a pattern that would be ever present on Remington shotguns moving forward. We'll talk about that more as we go, because this has a lot of transitional features as we get towards some later models. Now in 1958, Remington would come out with the Sportsman 58 shotgun, which should have put the 1148 on the back heel. However, the 1148 would wind up outliving the Model 58, with the Model 58 going out of production in 1963, which coincides with the introduction of the Remington Model 1100, also previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. Ultimately, competition with the Remington Model 1100 would wind up putting the 1148 on the back foot, and in 1969, the shotgun would be discontinued. All right, guys, that pretty much covers history. Why don't we go ahead and get into the features of this particular shotgun? Right off the bat, we have a 28-inch barrel. As you can see here, we have a raised bead sight, which is the only sighting system on the shotgun. I actually kind of prefer this for wing-type shooting and all that kind of stuff. It gives me a singular focal point in order to be able to track a target, and I appreciate that whenever it is that I'm doing any type of wing shooting. The shotgun would also be produced in a riot model, as well as a slug model, which would have shorter barrels. Now we'll note that this is a plain barrel. We don't have a vent rib or a solid rib or anything along those lines. The only version of the shotgun that would have that would be the skeet model. This is a fixed choke shotgun, which is pretty indicative of the time period. This is fixed full choke. The only way you'd be able to switch up chokes would be either A, have a whole bunch of barrels, which is kind of a cost prohibitive option, or B, install a poly choke, and it would not be unusual to see shotguns from this time period that are being utilized for certain purposes to have a poly choke installed so that you can swap out choke tubes and all that kind of stuff. Okay, I think that pretty much covers everything with the barrel. Why don't we go ahead and come back to the forestock here, the handguard. We can see here it's very nicely checkered. Feels very nice in the hands. This is where we run into some of our first instances of some of the transitional features of this particular shotgun. And that is specifically that just like the Model 11, this is a recoil operated system. As we can see here, there's a spring located underneath the handguard that allows me to compress the barrel just a little bit, and then there's another spring in the stock that drives the bolt forward again during cycling. Now, something else that we might notice is that we have this brass split ring right here, which is supposed to be used, supposedly, to tune this system for different types of shotgun loads. We will talk about that more here in just a little bit. Now, this is a 4-round capacity shotgun, plus 1 in the chamber. It is important to note that there's also a Sportsman model, which is what Remington at the time was using to identify guns that were meant solely for the hunting purpose, which had a limited capacity of 3 rounds. That would be 2 in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. However, if you pull out the magazine on those shotguns, you can those are just like crimps. So you can go ahead and use like a round file, remove those crimps, and then you would be able to have full capacity in your gun. That's what it is that I'm trying to say there. This is a 2 3/4 inch or shorter chambered shotgun. This is the 16 gauge version. They also produced it in 12, 28, 410, 20, pretty much everything but 10 gauge is probably the easier way to say that overall. Let's see here. We still have a button type setup like we had on the Model 11. However, we do not have to depress it in order to be able to load the shotgun. That is our slide release as well. We went away from the Model 11's humpback design in this particular shotgun. We have this much more rounded receiver, which we also wind up seeing on the Remington 870, the Sportsman Model 58, and the Model 1100 moving forward. In addition to that, we also have 2 takedown pins located here, pretty much the same locations as the previously mentioned shotguns, which allows us to be able to drop out this entire trigger pack right here. That is another kind of transitional feature going towards the 1100 from the 1148. We have our safety set behind the trigger guard. I'm not a big fan of the placement of the safety because it is behind the trigger guard. So my issue with that is that, yeah, it's fairly simple transition to go from the safety and kind of just move your finger forward onto the trigger. However, it kind of puts my wrist into an uncomfortable position. I'm further back on the grip than I want to be, where I would much rather be up here, nice firm grip, and then be able to activate the safety. And you can still kind of do that, but now you've got your finger perked up like this, and I just never really cared for that. I prefer Winchester's method of going about it, which is to put the safety in the front of the trigger guard so that you turn it off, your finger's straight like it naturally should be whenever it is that you're on a firearm, and then you can turn off that safety and very naturally bring your trigger finger back onto the trigger in order to be able to fire the gun. Then as your finger goes straight again when you're done firing, you can go ahead and, well, you have to kind of wrap around on them, but you can place the weapon on safe and then be back ready to go, where that's a little bit more difficult to do with this. So I've never really cared for the placement of Remington safeties. You can see here we have a semi-pistol grip, which has always been my preferred in shotguns. I like being able to, well, really anything. I like being able to pull against it into my shoulder in order to help steady the firearm. Again, we have some nice checkering here. And then we have our butt pad, nice rubber butt pad, but we notice you might just be able to make out there, it looks like it's slightly oversized, and that is because this shotgun has been cut down quite a bit, it would appear. Probably for some sort of shorter statured shooter, most likely a youth, could be a slender built man or woman as well though. All right guys, that's features. How does it shoot? Shooting this shotgun has most definitely been a trip here lately, as you could probably tell from some of the shooting footage that I have posted. I have had nothing but issues out of this shotgun. I actually had to refilm this video because I did film this prior to completing all of my shooting. And I had hopes that shooting would improve with this gun, and it never did. So we can see, first off, guys, yeah, I shot steel the entire time. I didn't get an opportunity to take this up and shoot some trap. Part of that being because my range is kind of weird when it comes to like trap, skeet, or 5-stand type shooting. And I also have a lot of other stuff that I'm working on. So I was on like the rifle ranges and stuff like that. And if I wanted to shoot on both the trap and the skeet, the trap range and the rifle range, I was going to wind up having to pay a lot more money and all that kind of stuff. And that just seems silly overall. In addition to that, guys, whenever it is that I'm doing reviews and stuff like that, I'm still working on my training. So whatever gun it is that I'm working on is the gun that I'm training around at that time. So this is my opportunity to practice just as much as it's my opportunity to be able to film and generate content for the channel. So I started off with some ready up drills from both the high ready and the low ready. And this is where I first discovered my issues. I found that the gun was malfunctioning every other round. So I would shoot the gun would eject the spent cartridge casing, but for whatever reason, the hammer was not resetting, and I would have a dead trigger when I went to fire the next round. I'd have to clear that round out, and then I would be able to shoot. That was at the start of things. In addition to that, I did have one particularly clumsy failure where the shotgun shell did not fully eject, so I cleared that out. And then in the process of getting the next shell in, I actually had a shell jump out of the magazine tube. So I found all that very interesting. I had on that first range day one clean run of the magazine where all 5 rounds went off without a hitch. Otherwise, I was clearing malfunctions every other shot, and I was getting very annoyed. So I took it home, cleaned it, lubed it, fiddled, switched the direction of the split ring and all that kind of stuff, trying to see if that would help. And on the next range trip, I was just doing, 5-round bill drills because this only holds 5 rounds, and I didn't feel like incorporating a reload. So generally, a bill drill is 6. However, with, something that's rounds limited, you kind of got what you got. So for this, something that's important to keep in mind, guys, I love my hanging steel. Like, it's been absolutely fantastic, and it's really helped me out with a lot of my training and stuff like that, and it also helps that I got it for free. But one of my issues with my hanging steel is that the targets move around so much that it actually really slows down my splits because I have to kind of allow that target to get through some of the wiggle before I can hit it with the next round. Regardless, so this was supposed to be firing 5-round strings. However, I ran into the same issue of every other round malfunctioning. And just me basically turning this thing into a single shot, which was getting really old really fast. I did have one clean run of 5 rounds without a hitch, but for the most part, I was clearing every other round. Now, in addition to that, I ran into an interesting little issue because this gun takes down in the same manner as the Remington Model 1100. So one of the times that I went back and swept the charging handle, I fired that last round, gun locked to the rear, and then I looked and found that the charging handle was no longer in place. That was because this is a friction fit type setup. You can just take it right out. And that's what happened when I cleared that malfunction. I managed to rip out the charging handle in the process. So the gun's still locked to the rear, and you could even still return the bolt to the forward position without the charging handle in place. You just had no way of charging it. No way of getting the bolt to the rear without the charging handle. And obviously, I managed to find it. But that was quite confusing there for a second. Like, why did this happen? I was trying to figure out, like, did I strip it out or did it just jump out? Because that's 2 different types of issues right there. Okay. So second range trip, not very successful. Definitely not very happy with that. What about the third range trip, Murph? Well, that's when things got somehow worse. So on this, I was just shooting the gun in order to make sure that it cycled. Like the whole idea here was to just shoot the gun. There was no drill, there was no training, nothing like that. Just shoot at the target and hope that the gun actually cycled. And if anything, it cycled worse. I would start to run into situations where I would have 3 malfunctions in a row. I would jack 3 rounds out of the magazine before I finally got one to go off. And that was getting really old. Really old, really fast. So, something else that I would point out in all of this shooting, you know, a lot of times people have a tendency to talk about shotguns as being this just like wave of destruction whenever it is that you fire. You know, the shotgun shot just creates this wall of lead that, you know, you can't escape or anything along those lines, and that's not the case. And you can really see that shooting at the relatively short distances of like between like 7 and 10 yards that I was shooting at. I was missing the steel because this is a full choke shotgun being shot at 7 to 10 yards. So you can kind of see like pattern does matter, and aiming a shotgun is definitely still a consideration whenever it is that you're talking about a close range type engagement indoors. All right, guys, that's shooting. Why don't we go ahead and get into my recommendations when it comes to this particular firearm? But I recommend this for duty use. Absolutely not. Not just this shotgun specifically because it is horrifically unreliable, but also, so great, you've got 5 rounds, and sure, if you had the riot version of this, yes, I would recommend that as a duty type weapon. But a 16 gauge full choke sporting arm such as this here, I would not recommend this for duty type use. It's entirely too long. I would much rather see 12 gauge. You can find so many more loadings and stuff like that for defensive type or for duty type purposes whenever it is that you're talking about 12 gauge over a 16 gauge. You can get buck and slugs, but you're not going to want to run buck and slugs through a full choke barrel long term on something this size. It's just not worth it. In addition to that, I can't mount like lasers, shell carriers, any of that kind of stuff. This gun is not built with that intent in mind, so why would you employ it in that manner? What about home defense, self-defense? It's better than a sharp stick, but I would still preference something else over this. Once again, we don't have the ability to attach like lights or anything along those lines. It's a very long gun, so if we're talking about like a truck gun or something like that, this is way too long for those purposes. And even in home defense, if you just have to cover a door, like there is no reason for you to have to exit your bedroom in a home defense type situation, then yes, this would work out just fine. But if you have to go secure a family member or something along those lines, this is way too long to be using in confined spaces. I would not recommend that for this purpose. I recommend this for that purpose. Okay, well, what about as a competition gun? Well, this is where things get a little bit more interesting. Now, once again, not this one because it's horrifically unreliable, but so I don't know, with it just being a fixed choke, I would not recommend it for skeet. There's a lot of different distances and speeds and stuff like that that you have to engage with in skeet, and this shotgun is really not set up for it. Kind of the same thing for 5-stand. As you move around a 5-stand, that really changes your engagement distance and like window and stuff like that, and this is probably too tightly choked for that purpose. But if you're talking about just trap, this shotgun would be really fun on trap. Now, one of the important things to keep in mind, especially with this particular gun, with this stock being as short as it is very fast to the shoulder, but, and I do prefer short stocks and all that kind of stuff, but especially like if you start with it on your shoulder, not that bad. But if you happen to start from a ready position and then transition to this thing in your shoulder, I sometimes find that I overdrive the stock and wind up with just like the corner of it in my shoulder. So as much as I like short stocks, this is probably too short in this case, which, I mean, yeah, I'm a full grown man. I have relatively long arms, so it's understandable that this gun maybe is not perfectly sized for me. And that's something to take into consideration whenever it is that you're talking about competition type uses with this particular shotgun. So I don't think it would be out of place for trap. I don't think it would be a good option in this configuration for the other two. Add a poly choke, changes that overall dynamic. Okay, well, what about as a hunting shotgun? Well, not this one because it's horrifically unreliable, but one of these that ran pretty good, this would be a fantastic upland game shotgun. Specifically, something that you're going to be moving around a lot for. So like rabbits. I would shoot squirrels with this, but one of the great things about this shotgun is that it's incredibly light. This thing's coming in around like 6 pounds, and it is very handy. Very, like a little bit longer stock, a little bit better like size associated stock for me. And this thing would be incredibly fast to the shoulder and all that kind of stuff, as long as I could hit that pocket consistently, which is the issue I have right now. This thing would be wonderful for like some of your smaller bird game. I don't default to the 16 gauge whenever it comes to like pheasant, but you could shoot pheasant with this if you had the right loads and all that kind of stuff. It's just not my preference. This would be a good dove gun, but dove is generally characterized as being fairly stationary type hunting, and I don't think the lightweight really helps in that case. This would be a really great grouse option with a little bit shorter barrel. That's one of the things that's holding it back in this case. Like, I've never really successfully grouse hunted, but from what I understand, you want a lightweight gun with a little bit shorter barrel for grouse type hunting. So you could do it. It just may not necessarily be optimal at that point. That's it though. I would not recommend this for any of the larger game because 16 gauge in a full choke, yeah, you can get slugs and buck, but that's not necessarily what the shotgun is set up for in this case. Cylinder bore, different story, though now you don't have the sighting system that you need because you just have that bead. It's not necessarily the best option whenever it comes to trying to shoot more precise on game. This is much, I think this shotgun lives and breathes as an upland game gun. That's what I would direct somebody to use this for. All right, what about like as a woods gun? I wouldn't take it hiking, that's for sure. Having this available in like a, you know, a razor or something like that, I don't know if it would be my first choice unless as I was bebopping around on my daily duties, I wanted to take like pot shots at doves. That would be a good use for this. But if I'm expecting it to be kind of like bear repellent or something along those lines, this would not be my choice. Not at all. Not for any type of predatory game would I want to have this around for defensive type purposes. This is more of a plinker if you're talking about it as a woods gun. I happen to be doing something and a rabbit jumps up and, you know, maybe I have the opportunity to be able to stalk it a little bit more and try to get that rabbit. All right, guys. Those are my recommendations. What are my uses for this shotgun? Well, previously this would have just been a trap option for me because I don't really hunt upland game anymore. I used to when I was a kid. I grew up hunting tons of upland game and dove and all that kind of stuff, and I really enjoyed it. However, as an adult, I've done less and less of it because you don't get as much bang for your buck, so to speak, whenever it is that you hunt upland game, and I would much rather deer hunt. Can I see how that little joke played out? It was terrible, I know. So at this point, as a trap gun, this would still hold interest to me, but the biggest thing, and I've brought it up a couple times now, is the lack of reliability. This would also be a great training tool to keep around for a youth shooter because of how short the stock is, but not if they're going to be sitting there having their semi-automatic shotgun turn into a single shot. So this gun, probably not sticking around in the collection much longer because I have zero interest in something that already has, like, I don't shoot a lot of trap either anymore, especially because like pretty much all of my energy is bent towards generating content for the channel. So I already don't have a lot of use for this gun, and it's not reliable. It's going to take a lot of time and effort and maintaining in order to be able to keep it on that track, whereas I could give a solid go at trying to fix it up and then let it go because I'm not necessarily going to keep sending the funds in this thing's direction in order to try to nurse it back to health. It's just that doesn't hold the interest for me at that point. Now, competitive options out on the market. This is an older shotgun. It's no longer in production. So I'm not necessarily going to invoke current options like, you know, a Benelli or a Winchester or anything along those lines. But I will look at some options from the same time period. Now, of course, a Model 11 would be a fantastic competitive option, especially since you can get it in the same chamberings. They are absolutely fantastic shotguns, wonderfully reliable, just good cycling guns, just a little heavy. But also the J.C. Higgins Model 60 which is a surprisingly fast, mechanically driven semi-automatic system from that same time period. So something to keep in mind there. I actually grew up, my dad had a J.C. Higgins Model 60. So I've grown up around them. I've seen them work. They can sometimes be a little bit ammunition finicky, but they are, especially on today's market, relatively inexpensive options that are available that you can still get out and hunt with some old world nostalgia. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.